I never want to hear y'all argue that gender inequality doesn't exist.
The fact that a woman can falsely accuse a man of rape for the sole purpose of ruining his life just because he didn't want to sleep with her, then suffers little to no jail time, while the man, on the other hand, loses his entire reputation, job, family, and maybe even his livelihood. I never want to hear y'all argue that gender inequality doesn't exist. Or that a man can have virtual and physical evidence of his ex-wife verbally and physically abusing him and get his accusations thrown out the window, while when she comes out with those same accusations with almost no evidence, the man, on the other hand, loses one of the biggest roles of his entire career and probably might lose a whole nother, while the woman, on the other hand, ends up in one of the biggest franchises of her entire career. I never want to hear y'all argue that gender inequality doesn't exist. Or how about this, when a woman admits to drugging men and then stealing their money, yet still becomes one of the biggest musical artists of our modern day and age. Or goes on to make music that literally degrades women and portray them as sex objects. I never want to hear y'all argue that gender inequality doesn't exist. Or one of my favorite ones, how a woman can literally go off in interviews and on friggin' Twitter and brag about how she raped men at a young age. And these things were so unaddressed that they're almost unheard of by a lot of people. I never want to hear y'all argue that gender inequality doesn't exist. Or how about the story of a young man who went to a party, got a little bit drunk, and a woman tried to take advantage of that by overpowering him, getting on top of him, trying to take off his clothes and kissing him despite him telling her to stop. While everyone around them just looked at him and said, "Why aren't you letting her do it?" I never want to hear y'all argue that gender inequality doesn't exist, when the only time you talk about gender inequality, it's about what one gender is doing to the other instead of gender inequality as a whole. Because both genders have problems on both sides. And if you're not going to be willing to address both, then the only thing that's unequal is what you're talking about when it comes to being unequal.